Okay, well, good morning, everyone. Today we are being joined by Dr. White from Berkeley. His research interests include community-based participatory research, historical archaeology, historic preservation, and heritage conservation. His academic research engages racialization in the United States and how that process shapes race relations in the present. His current work centers around a public archaeology project with African-American descendant communities on St. Croix in the United States Virgin Islands. For over 7 years, Dr. White has been an active blogger, podcaster, and ebook publisher. And Dr. White has generously agreed to speak with us today about his background in archaeology and the practical experiences and skills needed to pursue a career in archaeology. So the plan is that he will speak for about 30 minutes and then we will have a 30-minute Q&A session at the end of his talk. So please join me in welcoming Dr. White. Take it away, Bill.
All right, good morning, thanks. As mentioned, my name is Bill White. I'm an assistant professor at the University of California, Berkeley. And I want to take the time to acknowledge that I live here in Hercules, California, which is way over on the other side of the bay. I know folks from San Francisco they always look at the other side like it's some distant land or something, but in the East Bay, there's people who live there. And where I live, we live on the Muwekma Ohlone land that's unceded. And just have to acknowledge that the place where I live only could exist because of those ancestors who came before me, Ohlone individuals who are still fighting to gain sovereignty over their lands. So I kind of will change the script a little bit here. Rather than just talking for 30 minutes, I'd rather like to open this up to be a discussion for most of the time, but I will spend a little bit of time talking about my background and kind of some of the things that I see happening in archaeology as a career. Just some of the stuff based on my own background, and then some of the things that are going on as everything's changing in real time. My path in archaeology is kind of a roundabout way. When I was about 5 years old, I decided to be an archaeologist, and I just went and did it. So there wasn't really any deviation. For a little while there, I started in college as a marketing major, but I realized that wasn't really for me. And so immediately I went to archaeology and just never looked back. My first career was to be an astronaut, but I'm too tall to fit in a NASA spacesuit. So I decided archaeology would be my fallback. So I'm from Boise, Idaho, and I went for my undergrad at Boise State. And in that time, no one ever mentioned cultural resource management or really any actually doing archaeology. So I thought the only archaeologists there were in the United States were professors. And I started off getting a Native American Studies minor and doing most of my research there on Shoshone and Bannock folks, just doing whatever I could to learn about Great Basin Indians, Indians of Idaho, Native Americans of the Pacific Northwest. And that was really my research. I was very interested in all of that. And I graduated in 2001 with my BA and was working at Costco at the time, and tried to find a job in archaeology by looking in the yellow pages or, just Googling archaeology and job. And the only thing that was really coming up back then was professor positions, teaching, lecturer, lab director, graduate student positions. And I didn't meet the qualification for any of that. And one day, one of my old professors, after about a year of being out of college, went through my line at Costco and was like, "I thought you wanted to be an archaeologist." And I said, "Yeah, I do, but I don't know what to do." And that was the first time anyone ever mentioned cultural resources. He said, "Well, start working in cultural resources." So that's the first time I even knew what that term was. And then he said, the first thing you should do is start looking in cultural resources. And the second thing you should do is quit this job, because as long as you work here and as long as you have your bills paid, you're never going to actually go for your dream, because you'll always be comfortable. And so I don't know if that was a motivator, but it definitely made me realize that now was the time to go for it if I was ever going to. And at the time that I was applying for jobs in archaeology, I also started applying to graduate school. While I only applied to a couple locations, and I got into the master's program at the University of Idaho around the time that I started to get actual offers to be an archaeological technician. And so when I told the companies that, they said, just go get your master's and then apply again in a few years. Fortunately, Idaho already, being from a state that doesn't necessarily value education, the professors have to do cultural resource contracts to provide really any kind of income for the archaeology department. So they are a repository for artifacts in the state of Idaho. So they have that benefit, but they also have relationships with the Idaho Transportation Department and several Native American tribes in northern Idaho. And that was really where I started, because the master students were given positions on the contracts if professors had them. And when I was there, there was a highway project that I worked on to get experience while I was also a TA and taking classes. And that lasted for, I don't know, 7 months or so, 6 months, just long enough to get some experience that I could apply to be kind of a crew chief on field schools. So that's what I also did during the summer, field schools. And at that time, Idaho's strength, I think it still is, historical archaeology. The University of Idaho and Washington State are like 8 miles apart. And Washington State does a lot of museum studies and ancestral Puebloan and Pacific Northwest Native American archaeology. And Idaho does a lot of historical archaeology. So the departments students can take classes at both schools. So I took classes at Washington State and Idaho, and started focusing on historic artifact analysis, because in that area, there weren't really very many people focusing on historical archaeology. So I saw that, that's a way that I could definitely differentiate myself from many of the other people. And when I finished my master's, it took a little bit of time, but I got a job as a historical archaeologist at a CRM company in Seattle. And so for about 3 years, I worked all over Western Washington. And then later on, I got a job in Tucson, working for a company that had projects all over the West, California, Arizona, Nevada, some Washington projects again. And I did CRM for a long time, but I lived in Tucson, where, it almost all revolves around the University of Arizona. There really is a center for archaeological research methods and all that stuff. So you end up interacting a lot with folks from Arizona. But I had, a family at that time. I was married. I had, my wife had, our son was born, and he was little, and I was still going out on projects doing CRM. It didn't really look like I was going to make it to the level that was, able to stay at home more often. So I was getting sent out all the time to do these projects, and she's left at home to take care of my son. And then she got pregnant with my daughter, and it was kind of like an inflection point, because there's so many archaeologists in Arizona, and the way the state regulations are set up. If you don't have a PhD, it's pretty hard to be a principal investigator, or one of the people who stays back at the home office. So I decided, all right, I'll figure it out, and somehow I'm going to go to Arizona. I'm going to get a PhD, and then when I'm done, I'm just going to be able to stay at home more with my kids while they're little. And then if my back isn't broken, I'll start going back out into the field and digging later on. Well, that was probably one of the best things that happened, because when I was doing CRM, I was focusing on, historic artifact identification and working on all these different sites that were, associated with all these amazing stories, homesteaders and folks that were, building roads and all kinds of different stuff, dam construction and relicensing for FERC. And I learned a lot about the regulatory contexts and about working on a whole bunch of different kinds of historical sites. But you don't just work only on historical sites. So I also got to do a lot of work on Coast Salish sites, from archaic up to, more recent times, Duwamish, Suquamish, Stillaguamish people all over Western Washington and the Puget Sound area. Then in Central Washington, Yakima, Spokane, Palouse, Nez Perce, all these different kinds of sites there. And then in Arizona, working on ancestral Puebloan, Hohokam, some Mimbres sites, but then also archaic sites that are before those archaeological cultures. So I got a lot of experience working on a lot of different sites under a lot of different regulatory contexts, all over the place. But it was hard to keep going, being away from my family so often when my kids were so young. So when I went to Arizona, I got a job working for the Bureau of Applied Research in Anthropology, and my job there was really to teach Native American folks how to become archaeological technicians so that they could work for their tribal historic preservation offices, but also to do a lot of historic contexts and do interviews with indigenous folks, but also European American ranchers and other folks who were using landscapes in North Dakota and Montana. And in that position, I spent a long time working with the Blackfeet tribe most closely, but other folks that had connection to the Badlands in Teddy Roosevelt National Park. What was great about that is I finally was doing that kind of advocacy work that I'd wanted to do, and working with folks who were trying to reclaim sovereignty over these lands that are in the public domain through the National Park Service, or that were subject to cultural resources without their involvement. You know, I was able to actually do that kind of collaborative work that I always wanted to do. And I figured when I finished my PhD, I would just keep doing that. And the way that it goes when you're going for your PhD, you folks are graduate students or undergrads?
I'm a graduate student.
Okay.
I'm undergrad.
Okay. So if you're going for, PhD or higher, there's just this tsunami of pressure to apply for tenure track jobs. And it's like, when you are awake during the day, you'll be thinking and talking about archaeology. When you should be asleep at night, you're going to be reading and writing about archaeology. And then when you're supposed to be asleep or eating breakfast, you're going to apply for tenure track positions. And, there's 20 or 30 a year. So the rejection rate is astronomically high. So I heard the word no like dozens of times. I mean, that wasn't something that was that strange to me too, because trying to go for jobs in cultural resources, I mean, I applied for, I don't even know, man, a couple hundred jobs doing throughout my career to do archaeology, especially when I was looking for work all over the country, even sometimes in other countries. And getting turned down was actually like something I wanted to hear, because getting ghosted is your most often response, that you don't hear anything. You put these stuff into these Fed or USA jobs portals, and it just vanishes, and you never find out if anyone ever went for that job, or you never figure out like what ever happened with that at all. So hearing the word no was at least some kind of closure on the fact that, well, I'm not going to get that job. So by the time I was applying for tenure track jobs, hearing the word no from all these universities was just that's how the job search goes. You hear the word no tons and tons of times. And then finally I heard the word yes from Cal, and I was kind of like, whoa, I mean, wow, that's crazy. You know how many times I got turned down before I got here? So my plan of going back to cultural resources got derailed because I got an even more amazing job that I couldn't have dreamed would happen at UC Berkeley. So, that long-winded introduction, a couple of the things that, kind of helped me was the fact that in my case, I wanted to prove everyone wrong, that you could actually, in fact, get a job doing archaeology, because, a lot of my relatives, they didn't think that was a thing. And, doing archaeology for so long, I've been laid off and let go, several different times when I had, bills to pay and a whole bunch of other stuff. And so the question is like, why would you even keep going after this after you've already found out that, it could possibly end? And the reason why is because archaeology is the only job I didn't want to quit in the first 20 minutes. I mean, if you think about all those other jobs you had before, working for other companies, delivery, Costco, all these other different things, restaurants, even office jobs, within about 10 minutes, you realize that you were just there to make money, because that was the only reason why you would even be at that place. Otherwise, you never would have even been there. So I wasn't really ready to take a job just for money yet. I wanted to keep trying to do archaeology, which I actually enjoy doing. So when everyone would say this wasn't a good idea, and when it seemed like fate was saying it wasn't a good idea, I just kept trying anyway. Even when I had to get temporary jobs to pay the bills, I just kept trying to get archaeology jobs because that's what I wanted to do. And so, at some day, it's probably not going to be the job that I wanted. And, then I'll just try to find some other kind of career. But right now, I still love doing archaeology. And so I'll just keep doing it. The other thing is there is definitely a kind of like just kind of stubborn desire, or just some kind of something that's inherent in the people who stay in archaeology for a long time that isn't in the people who go and do archaeology for a little while and stop. I mean, everyone who gets paid to do archaeology can now say they were a professional archaeologist, and that dream of being an archaeologist came true and they did it. But someone who stays in it for their entire career, like I said, they just keep doing it. They don't stop. And it's not like, it's not like things always necessarily get better. In my case, they got better. And most of the other people who've been in as long as me, they definitely find the office job, and they're doing a lot of work from the office, and they don't actually have to go out as much, and they're, have benefits and are higher paid and less likely to get laid off. But that doesn't come without a long time of just sticking with it, even when, it doesn't seem like it's going to work out. So a couple of things also that I'm noticing now that is actually really great for anyone who's trying to get into archaeology now is there's a retirement burst that's going to happen. It might have gotten slowed down by COVID, but before this, government agencies where they had people who were retiring because their investments were all at the highest that they'd seen in a while. They'd made back the money from the recession and they were retiring. Their companies, older people who had started these companies in the 80s and 90s were selling them to larger companies, and it seems like that's great for the people who own the company. They sell their smaller cultural resources company to someone larger. But what ends up happening is that comes along with a larger overhead and kind of like a purging of skilled employees from that smaller company, who then can spin off and start another small company to fill the void. So there's a huge turnaround where folks that are in their 60s now are selling their companies and getting out of the game, and people my age in their 40s are spinning off and starting their own companies, which means they're hiring new people. There's also, now that we've got Biden in here, a possibility that investment in infrastructure is actually going to for real happen. I mean, I think Trump said he was going to do it, but then we never saw any actual motion on it. I think that now, given the fate that we're looking at for the next 4 years, dropping money into infrastructure improvements, that's a possibility. It was something that Obama did. It kept me employed doing cultural resources on all kinds of stuff, solar farms and dam relicensings and all kinds of stuff for 8 years. That all was pretty good for the environmental compliance industry, because it created the federal nexus required for jobs. And then I also see that there's a smaller enrollment in university anthropology departments, which means there's fewer people graduating. So, in the past, we've had tons and tons of people who are all graduating, and they all have the same basic skills and abilities, and they're all applying for those entry-level jobs. But that number of individuals who could meet that criteria is going down because we have less enrollments in anthro departments. And, anthro degree is one of the easiest pathways or most steady pathways towards cultural resources, which is where most people work. So those three things together, mixed with the fact that our regulatory contexts are robust and are actually, in fact, the National Historic Preservation Act is now finally dovetailed with the National Environmental Policy Act. So, many of these larger projects, they're doing an entire National Environmental Policy Act review rather than doing the small historic preservation one, which means that streamlines the entire process and makes organizations more likely or less likely to try to skirt or avoid it, because it's all rolled together with plants, animals, watershed, geology, contaminants and historic properties all put together into one study. I mean, that streamlines the thing, which means that things can move forward faster and you can get more projects done. So those are all really good things. I'm also kind of seeing that stuff in the California state parks and the California Caltrans too, where they need a lot of people. And I don't know what's going to happen with the recession that's possible, could happen in 2021 and beyond. But there's, you know, commitments to infrastructure investment at a time when Caltrans and California state parks already needed archaeologists. They already were foreseeing that they needed to hire more, and that didn't even include the retirements. And then now, you know, there's even more of a demand. So I think this is a good time for folks to finish college and to aim towards going into archaeology, probably better than it was when I first started. So I guess, you know, we have questions here. I don't know if you would like to go with the questions the class posed, or if we should open it up to questions for the folks in the class.
So thank you so much for that intro, Bill. That was really informative. I think that we can take questions now, but I do want to be sure to cover just sort of broad topics. For example, a lot of my students have approached me about, you know, gaining practical experience in archaeological fieldwork, whether they should take archaeological field schools. How do you find a reputable field school? How do you sort of make that segue from your undergraduate education or your graduate education into the CRM industry? Sort of, you know, those like more practical aspects of like, you know, as an undergraduate in anthropology, then like, what are your next steps? Like how do you become a practicing archaeologist and the way that you did it, or the way that you can recommend. But as long as we get to that, I think that it would be great to just open this up for questions. You all can ask questions in the chat, or you can ask in person.
We have until 11:30, is that right?
Yeah, I was going to run it till 11, but we can go a little bit over if we need to.
Okay, that's fine.
For those of you who need to leave early. I do see that Talya did ask a question in the chat. So let's start with Talya. She says, thank you, Dr. White, for being here. Question. A common path for archaeological students is to follow the research pursued by their advisors. These are often projects that began before NAGPRA. Do you think it is irresponsible for students today to do research with collections of Native American remains or artifacts that are likely connected to tribes who are not yet federally recognized? Excellent question, Talya.
Yeah, that is an excellent question. You know, I'm not the best person to ask about NAGPRA questions. And I don't work at the place that's a leading institution for NAGPRA, right? Like the biggest violator is not UC Berkeley, the Hearst Museum, right? So I don't know, they're probably associated, but I work at one of the biggest sinners and I'm not super in-depth familiar with NAGPRA remains, but you know, here's what I would say about that. If the work is being done in conjunction or collaboration with Native people who want to see that, and they can say that those are the things that are theirs with limited claims, right? They don't have to be federally recognized to recognize their own cultural patrimony. If those are remains and they are in consultation and, you know, there's not necessarily a pathway to repatriate them, then I don't see where you're doing anything wrong, because you're working in conjunction with what the tribe would actually like to see happen with things that they don't necessarily get to push the issue to have repatriated, right? In some cases, tribes that are not federally recognized can work through other tribes or just get their things repatriated because they have the capacity to handle them all. And I mean, there's this mountain of loopholes that tribes have to go through to get their own stuff back. And sometimes unrecognized tribes are able to do all that stuff that they're asking, you know, these museums asked. But I don't think that you're doing anything wrong by working with stuff, as long as the tribe is aware and that you've shared the research questions, but even better, created the research questions in collaboration with the tribe, so that you're addressing things that they actually already want to know with things that they have that have already been collected, right? So I don't think that there's necessarily anything wrong with that. The problem comes if you come into a thing that already had bad blood, right? So if you drop into a thing that's already, a combat zone between someone who has things that's taking ownership of stuff and a unrecognized group that is, pushing to get those things back, or at least the research stopped, and you've got some, person that's, the researcher that you're working with is just adamant about doing research and not listening to tribes, that's where it can be a problem, because then all that stuff that happened before you got there is attached with your name on it. So that's the only thing to watch out with. If you're coming by something that was ill-gained 100 and something years ago, and then since NAGPRA, the tribe's been asking for those things back, and that to be the research to be stopped, and your advisor is either silent or has spoken out on record against repatriating those things and has come out in that way, your name's going to be attached to that individual. And they're already a established scholar. You're not. So as things go forward in the future, I mean, one of the key things is state or tribal historic preservation offices are hiring a lot of archaeologists. They're getting their state or their tribal historic preservation offices set up faster than they can get folks from their tribe willing or trained to meet the Secretary of Interior standards. So they got to hire us. That's one of the things that I used to do at Barra, work for tribes. If they find my name hooked up to this, controversy associated with human remains from some other native tribe, that doesn't make me look good. The other person that's already got benefits and a salary and a cushy home and stuff, well, they can go ahead and say whatever they want because they're already there. It's less likely they're going to get fired, right? The person who's coming up is coming up through all of that controversy.
Thank you so much, Bill. I think those are all really, really, really excellent points. And I think, just to jump in here, as someone who has no experience working with NAGPRA collections, but as someone who's done archaeology for a while and completely agrees with what Dr. White said, I think that anytime you're working with any collection of human remains, obviously proceed with caution and with kindness and care. And I think understanding, as Dr. White said, the historical context of the collection that you're working with, where did it come from? What are its affiliations? What's the sort of political context surrounding that collection of human remains? But also the flip side of that is that working with, human remains does in some ways pose an interesting and I think fruitful opportunity to collaborate in a very careful and cautious way with Indigenous Native communities, right? Like there's that potential there. And of course, these projects can't be, sort of fly by night on the quick projects. This has to be a very careful, conversational, respectful relationship that you can build with these communities if that opportunity presents itself. So I think just being cautious and careful and doing a deep dive into the sort of historical context and the potential political ramifications of this research is really, really important. Thank you.
Yeah, just like Dr. Reifschneider just mentioned, the alternative is if it is a totally awesome collaborative thing, and then you get your name associated with that, then that's going to get you a good reputation from the very get-go. And as Dr. Reifschneider mentioned, they're not going to happen in a few days. So you could be, your graduate time there could be part of a really productive multi-decade thing. And you get to be one of the many people who's trained in these ethical methods of doing this kind of research with human remains.
Thank you both. That is so many perspectives and interesting things to think about for making an important project, especially on the West Coast here in California. I think we're going to need those types of long-term projects now.
We have a question from Miles next. So Miles, go ahead.
Hey, Professor, how you doing? Thanks for coming in today to talk with us and give us some insight. I was just wondering if you knew of any companies or people that are offering paid internships to help with like former combat zone dig sites or anything, because I'm into like military history and I'd like to get into that type of field.
Sure, I'm glad you asked that. And also so there's kind of two halves to this. There's groups that are looking to repatriate human remains of victims or not victims. I mean, there are soldiers who have fallen in battle in other countries, right? So there's ongoing repatriation process in Vietnam, Cambodia, Pacific Islands to get American soldiers back home, or at least identify where they have fallen and appropriately bury their remains where they're at. And then there's also kind of the historic preservation and commemoration of battlefields, right? So that's happening here in the United States through like the National Park Service or state parks. Now, I don't necessarily know about any paid internships right now, but I do know that there's kind of like archaeological technician or entry-level NPS positions that you could get at one of those battlefields, right? So one example would be to work at the battlefield doing some kind of research, or maybe even some kind of like interpretation work or something like that as an intern that's not necessarily doing the excavation, right? A lot of times excavation or anything like that would be done by people who already have finished their degree and done a field school and have been hired, even if it's just a summer program, right? So it all just depends on where you're at in the spectrum. Here in the United States, yeah, the National Park Service, those battlefields, just pay attention to USA Jobs. I don't know if you have heard of that website. Let me look.
No, not yet, but I'm gonna definitely look into that.
Dr. White, did you link that on the resource page that you sent me? Or should I
No, but
add it? I'll add it.
I'm cutting in and pasting. You can go ahead and add it.
I'll add it.
It's the official time vacuum of anyone wanting to get a job for the federal government.
Oh, sure is. It's a good weekend project, navigating the USA Jobs site. So crack open a beer, drink some tea, and
crack open like 6 beers if you actually want to get the job. You're going to
right.
be there for a long time. But there's another one too. My internet. Oh, here we go.
Oh yeah, you linked it. Thank you.
Yeah, but here's another one too. PreserveNet. Now, PreserveNet is going to have more of historic preservation jobs, and those could actually be at state battlefields too, right? So if you look through there, you'll see a lot of positions for architectural historians or architecture interns or historic preservation interns, but sometimes they'll be at sites that have a battlefield or something like some kind of a war memorial. And those jobs are in the United States too. So USA Jobs are with the federal government in the United States or US territories. PreserveNet is in the United States. And if you look closely, there's all different kinds of preservation jobs that don't necessarily involve archaeology.
Sweet, thank you. I appreciate it.
I mean, I guess we just mentioned the government jobs, right? Okay, so there's a comment here about the horrors of the academic job market. All right, here's the deal. Companies and organizations always need qualified and skilled people. They need them during depressions. They need them during, economic collapses. They need them during the very best times. They're always hiring people they think can help them save money or make money. The government doesn't work that way because the government doesn't necessarily have to make any money. If we make money, the government gets money. If we don't make money, the government still gets money. So there's no incentive for them to hire the best skilled or the highest qualified or any of that stuff. But there's plenty of incentive to make the hiring process drag on forever and ever and ever, because all those HR people and those hiring managers and every single person gets to justify their existence. So companies and small nonprofits and small museums, they hire people fast, or they hire people slow and they lay them off fast. But when it's time to hire people, they look through the candidates and try to find the best individual that will help them out. The government makes it a long, complicated process that takes forever because there's no real motivation to hurry up or to get things done, right? So that's the big thing when you're applying for jobs. You should, when you're looking for a job and you're trying to get out there, now there's layers of contact with people through social media. So you can join groups and you can join different online organizations and kind of interact with people through the internet. But hopefully we'll get back to face-to-face meetings again so that you can actually meet people in person, right? And all of that stuff is great for you to meet archaeologists with the state parks because they consult with a lot of companies, but they also hire archaeologists. But then also to talk to people who work for nonprofits and historic preservation organizations and cultural resources companies as just kind of a person-to-person, networking type thing. But when push comes to shove, the person who runs the company or the small nonprofit is going to hire you in like 48 hours. The government will drag it 48 weeks because they don't, what's the motivation for the government to ever get smaller, or more efficient, or, more functional, right? And I work for a government agency, so yeah, that's the biggest difference I can see between CRM and working for the university. The university, you pay up front for services at the university. In business world, they pay you after you've done the job, based on you doing the job and the agreed upon contract, right? So if you get the money up front, think about all the restaurants you eat at where you get the money up front. What kind of place is that, right? Like how much can you really complain at McDonald's for not using the right spices on your fries, right? Versus a place that you've ordered and you got to wait till the end. Oh, you can ask them to do all kinds of stuff. And if they want to get the money, they better do it. So those are the two different, ways. And when you're looking for a job, you need to network and do your best to connect with people in different functional, professional ways. But at the end of the day, the companies are going to be the one that'll hire you fast.
Thank you. I didn't even think about like the business aspect of all that and the little intricate details of that. So thank you. That's very insightful.
All right, do we have any more questions?
I do have a question.
Yeah.
Yesterday in the methods class, we talked briefly about having a blog as an archaeologist and kind of, putting things out there as a kind of a form of networking. Do you have any advice as far as like what should be put in a blog and how that should be kind of formatted, I guess?
Yeah, I was on mute. Yeah, I have a lot to say about that. So I'm trying to find, well, I can put it in the notes later, but so like the internet is probably the greatest shenanigan machine that ever happened. Before this, it was like 3-minute elevator speeches, but now you can like turn those elevator speeches like into radioactive, concentrated, powerful assets, right? So what I mean by that is before the internet, you had to do networking by either meeting the individual face-to-face or writing them a letter or something like that, and then conversing with them on the phone or something like that. And that would be the way that you would tell people who you are. You would introduce yourself and you would give them a spiel, and then based on that face-to-face interaction, that's what they would get an impression of you as a professional, right? But it wasn't like they were going to go and dig through libraries to find the articles or the newspaper op-ed that you wrote or something like that. They were just going to take your word for it that you did this thing and that you really felt that way about archaeology, and that was just all there was to it. But now with the internet, you can create a website that's mixed in with all these other social media platforms and YouTube and other content platforms that you can basically craft. You can do it politician style, where you can craft your own identity. Now, at the end of the day, you're going to end up having to back up what you say. If somebody hires you and you don't have those abilities, it's going to make you look bad. And archaeology isn't really that big of a field. If you get shown up once or twice, then you're pretty much done, because there's only like 17,000 archaeologists. But meanwhile, you can use the internet to create a really targeted persona for yourself as an archaeologist, as a field technician, as someone who does archaeology, and you can put that on all these different things, and it'll just amplify through the internet to the point where people, when they click on your name, it becomes synonymous with that, right? So they don't even see any of your posts about, the delicious foods that you ate every single morning. They start to only see your stuff on archaeology. So that's a good thing, in that now that you can create your own identity. You see, professors I have a blog. Many other people have all these different, platforms online that explain our work. But if you do it right and connect it to your social media and use all the right kinds of meta tags and other things that are optimized for search engines, then you can make that reverberate way further than any kind of article or this talk that we're doing or anything like that. Like a perfect example is I wrote an article, I think in 2017 for historical archaeology, and I haven't checked in a while, but I think like 345 people had looked at it or downloaded it from the Springer website. And I published an article on Sapiens, which is like an online article. And about 35,800 people had looked at it since June. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that when you type in my name or certain kinds of keywords, it's going to dominate any of the silly stuff that I've done on Facebook or anything else that has my name attached, right? Like the internet gives it that kind of weight that makes it go much further. So, I mean, I'll try to find it and send it to you all, but I wrote a thing on building an online persona that was published on the SHA blog, and it goes into deep depth. But I mean, at the base level, what you'd want to do is definitely have a LinkedIn, and everybody says that LinkedIn is blah 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 or whatever. Well, if you create a LinkedIn that's loaded with enough keywords and connections to other professionals, then that can overpower a lot of the other social media stuff that you have on, and you don't have to write a blog or anything like that. If you can also be a contributor to another blog, that way you don't have to actually manage the website, you just make content. So you can always connect with someone who has their own archaeology blog or something else and connect in that way as one of their contributing authors. Or you can build your own website with your name and make that a professional, platform. Or I guess you can just go totally crazy like I have and just make all this stuff on the internet and then use certain keywords for years and years and years, to the point where if you just type certain things in, they're just going to find your name because you have so many links aiming back to it and you're connected to so many people. So I guess it just depends on like what direction you want to go. In reality, the internet is already cataloging you all of the time anyway. So, and also it's against the law for people to, discriminate on your hiring status based on stuff that they saw on the internet, like your social media, right? So you can't look on there and see that someone is driving, a van with a handicap enabled van and talk about your new van and then assume that person cannot be an archaeologist. That's against the law if you don't hire that person because you think they're handicapped and won't be able to dig or walk or something like that. Like that's against the law. That's discrimination based on ability, right? But I will tell you that people definitely look online and they're going to look you up. So they see your name, especially companies. Nowadays, people my age or younger, they're going to Google your name and try to figure out who you are. You ask if I'll write a reference letter or talk to you about the grad program at Cal, I'm going to look and see. And if I don't see anything, then it's kind of like, well, okay, is this real? Is this spam? Like, what is this, right? If I see that they're a graduate student institution, then I know they're a real student and that like, okay, this isn't a trick. This is something that's for real. Yeah, I should respond to this, right? If I click on there and see that they won the Nobel Peace Prize for archaeology and this and that, and they've saved an entire town just using archaeology alone, I'm like, holy shit, I should be actually, asking to talk to them. Like, they're amazing. And that's the kind of stuff that can happen if you have a bunch of stuff on the internet. The opposite can happen too. If you say a bunch of stuff that gets slammed down and, you say something that's messed up on a social media platform and somebody calls you out with it forever, your name is, going to be connected to that one statement on one social media platform. So you got to watch out. I recommend anyone who's using social media right now, start sanitizing it. Get rid of anything that's not archaeology and start just concentrating it into archaeology. That's the easiest thing. Stop doing random photos of, croque monsieur sandwiches and start putting a bunch of archaeology junk on there so you can change the algorithm over time to the point where your name starts coming up to the top when you search for archaeology. That's by far the easiest thing to do. And it's social media anyway. It's like a dumpster. Who cares? Like you're eating out of the dumpster anyway. Like go ahead and do whatever you're going to do, but make sure that it's going to help you in the end. I want to see that. The Nobel Peace Prize, let's do it. But those things are constantly aggregating your name and identity. And all I really did is just don't put anything about kitties on there and just only archaeology. And over 7 years, it's just this archaeology. That's all you see.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I would, if you get a chance to link that, what you wrote about the social media, I would love to read that.
We have questions from I have two screens here. You can't see I'm pointing, like you can see that I have another screen here, but I have another screen.
Yeah, do we have any more questions from our audience before we move on? Now's your chance. Okay. Okay, so yeah, Bill, let's work back to some of the other questions that I was sent.
Okay.
If that works for you.
Sure.
And
okay, so the one that I'll start with, which courses helped my archaeology career? I wrote a blog post where I actually quantified that. It wasn't so hot. You can look at tables in that blog post. So the ones that helped my archaeology career are ones that taught me either to do independent research, so thesis credits, well, thesis or dissertation credits for sure, independent studies that I created myself where I had to do all of the research, like my undergrad portfolio, when I had to put together all these papers and all this other stuff and build a resume and everything. Like those things helped me a lot. Archaeological field school definitely helped me a lot. And then many of the ones that were actually archaeology or anthropology classes, those helped me a lot. Sometimes there were outside classes like anatomy and physiology or logic or geology that weren't anthropology or archaeology classes that I ended up learning a lot. And I used a lot of that stuff later on when I went into be an archaeologist. But you can look and see that a huge amount of that was stuff that never really helped me. That was just, you know, classes I took, right? Like, you know, speech or intro to theater, right? Like those were classes that were just there. And I was a zombie that sat through them all and did whatever assignments, and they actually gave me no benefit for my career, right? Now they could have given me a benefit if I like went into public speaking or, you know, went into acting and did something else. That theater class could have maybe helped me, or that speech class could have helped me, but instead they didn't. So which college courses helped my career were ones where I actually had to do things that were related to actual archaeology. That's all it boils down to. Want me to just keep going down the list?
yeah.
Okay, all right.
Do it.
So this one, field school, actually is coming up now because it's getting to be the time where you need to start thinking about applying for field school and stuff. And we're in the middle of a pandemic. So here's the thing that I'll say about field school, like for 2020, this only relates to the current time we're in. Just make sure that you can get your money back, because there's no guarantee that these field schools are actually going to happen. In fact, the one that I administer in St. Croix, we're not going to have it in 2021 because we can't fulfill the safety protocols that I already know you need for field sciences for the University of California system. And if I can't do that, I mean, well, actually I can't afford it. I just can't afford for every single person to have their own rental car and their own apartment and their own food and to always be 6 feet apart when we're out in the forest. Like I just can't do that. And I also cannot require individuals to take a vaccine that we don't necessarily have and we don't even really know if it's going to work or if people will take it, right? So we're just in December, as soon as the semester's over, going to just talk for our research questions for 2021. And, you know, we're not going to the field. I'm not going to take students to the field because I can't provide for their safety through COVID, which means I don't have to give anyone a refund or anything like that because I'm not going to take their money. But I'm already starting to see the advertisements for individuals to go to field school right now. And my question to the people who are doing them that I've actually been sending them emails is, do you have 100% money back guarantee? What's the wait time? Is it 90 days? Is it 30 days? Because if you put a down payment down and you've got $2,700 or whatever tied up in a field school, you could definitely use that money not on a field school, right? So are you going to end up having to wait all the way till September to get your money back? Or do you just get it back in a couple of weeks? Or is it like 48 hours? Or, what's the deal? And then if they don't do the field school, are they going to give you a refund? Or are they going to try to roll it over into 2022? Like, that's another thing. Like, are they going to keep your money and you don't get it back? Like, I'm just telling folks they need to look at the fine print when it comes to that. In general, there's kind of just on field schools in general, like as far as being from the United States, a US citizen, like, first of all, being a US citizen is amazing in that we live in a place that has archaeology where you get paid and like, this can be a real job, right? But that means that we're less desirable in the international world. It's more difficult to get a job through a company or in another country because you're a US citizen. Like, you already, like, it's difficult to permanently get hired in Ireland as an American citizen to do archaeology because they already have tons of people in Ireland that are archaeologists. Like, you can't demonstrate that you have a skill that someone in Ireland doesn't already have, right? So it's difficult for you to get hired in these other countries. And then in some places, many South American, many African countries, Asian countries, that's not really a job. Like, they don't really pay people to do archaeology. So then once again, like, how would you make a career in a field that's kind of for university professors and not really cultural resource? International countries handle the CRM in those countries, so they don't really have a national CRM system. So when it comes to field schools, you got to think about that. Now, there is a built-in, I don't know where the hell it comes from or what. There's a thing that a lot of companies don't want to hire students who have taken a field school in another country because they feel like that wasn't somehow real archaeology. Like, a trowel doesn't work in, Ghana the way that it works in Tennessee. Like, they just think that that's not. So when they look on your resume and they see that you have a field school and you went to one in Ghana, a lot of companies will just be like, oh, well, they don't know anything. This person is not someone we want to hire, right? But something that was another field school in, Tennessee, if you're applying to a Tennessee school, they'll somehow think that that's way more relevant and that you somehow are a better hire. My argument against that, so my argument always has been, and I've been overruled many times, is that you should look at the skill of the individual rather than where they did their field school. So if they did a field school in Ireland or Ghana or, Peru or something like that, just look at what else they have done. Have they done a bunch of artifact analysis? Have they done volunteer work? Have they been actually doing archaeology, but that was where their field methods were learned in the other country? Or is it just someone who did a field school in Tennessee that worked at Costco for the entire time, and that's all they've done, right? So you're just valuing that Tennessee field school over everything else. Like, I always would say that. And then the other people who are helping me hire for the crew immediately would be like, no, you're wrong, and we're just not going to listen to you. Sorry. Because there's enough people from Tennessee that we don't need to hire anyone from anywhere else. So when you're going for a field school, you always have to balance. Do you do the dream project that you always wanted to in another country and then do the extra work in the United States to justify that you're a human that's worthy of doing archaeology? Or do you just do the domestic field school knowing that if you're a professional archaeologist, you can just talk to the people who are doing that dream school and just go there for a few weeks, like, anyway? I mean, who's going to turn down a skilled archaeologist when you've got 19 students who have never even, dug with a shovel? Some of them have never even put on work gloves before, and they're on your thing, and you're going to volunteer to work there? Like, yeah, I mean, if it was a volunteer and it wasn't going to be, a hindrance to my project, I'd let a professional archaeologist work at my project. I try to set them up so that they are community things, so that if there was a volunteer, they could just work there anyway. You can always do the dream dig in the future using your vacation time from your professional archaeology job. But, doing the field school locally may not, you may be of the mind that, like, this is my chance to do that project. And you may be right. I mean, you don't really get a lot of chances to do excavation in Peru or, Ethiopia or some of these amazing places. So if you can afford it, yeah, like, go ahead and try that. But just know that when you get back, there might be some kind of, like, unstated bias against people who took field schools outside of the States. That's why I tell students, like, just balance, like, Is this a moonshot? You're going to do it once, you got it over with, and now we're going to work for a career? Or are you going to work for a career knowing that if you make enough money, you can always just do that, and you can do it like 65 times? Oh, and also look for ones that are going to give you a chance to do something besides just dig holes. That's the, if all you learn is just troweling out some kind of trench or something like that, it doesn't matter. If you don't get to identify artifacts, and you never get to learn how to use the tablet or the GPS or the theodolite or any of the other stuff, you never get to see them do the drone, you never get to do anything but just dig a hole and put artifacts in a bag with some Sharpie marks on it. Like, that's not really going to help you. It doesn't matter what part of the world you're in. Digging a hole is not really super hard for me to teach someone how to do. To think like an archaeologist, that's like a lifetime thing. It's hard for me to teach someone to think about things like an archaeologist, but it's not hard for me to teach someone how to dig a hole. I mean, I got photos of my son when he was 4 years old digging holes on archaic sites. If a 4-year-old can do that, then I'm pretty sure a 24-year-old can do it as well. It's the bigger stuff about how archaeology actually works. That's what you really want to get. So that's another question you want to know, like, is it just me digging holes, or do I actually get to identify skeletal remains? Do I get to do this? Do I get to do that? That's what you want, the full experience.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. I think that's a really, 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 really good point. And that sort of, careful analysis of the field school postings, which I've given a lot of you links to when you go on to those websites, for example, the AIA or whatever, and start looking for field schools, especially field schools abroad, do make sure that they very, very closely list all of the different skill sets that students will be participating in. So for example, like if it just says excavation, be a little wary, because that might be the kind of project that Bill was just talking about, where you're like, and I've been on those projects, I've volunteered on those projects, I've been supervisors on those projects where students just basically sit in the same 2x2 unit for 6 weeks and are just digging a square hole. Again, that's a skill that can be learned in a day by a 4-year-old. What you really want to do is have the opportunity to learn different skill sets on that project. And it is not out of line to, be in contact with that project director that's listed there on the field school posting and say, like, what kinds of, opportunities does this project offer students? Like, is it just excavation, or we also have lab time and artifact analysis? Like, what kinds of other technical skills do students learn on this project? And really push them on being very upfront with you about the kinds of work that you'll be doing, because you can be in the coolest place in the whole world and still just be doing very tedious work that doesn't necessarily move your career forward in any way. Dr. White says those are the kinds of projects I wish I got to do again. Yeah, me too. I would happily sit in a square hole and dig right now. Awesome.
Yeah, I want to get to the point where I don't have to do anything but just dig and sift. And I just put it in a bag and leave it there. Like, what level is that from? Where's your paperwork?
Paperwork.
Oh, I know where my coffee is and my sandwich. That's all I need. So the next one about how to gain experience in archaeology during COVID and shutdowns. The one thing to remember, especially doing archaeology, especially cultural resources, shutdown happens. It's called layoff, right? That's just part of being an archaeologist in the United States. So, when you're an archaeologist, and I've talked pretty extensively about this, you got to save money and you got to be ready to get laid off. The companies that I worked for, and it wasn't just a few of them, every single one of them always had these times where there was a gap between the money that was supposed to come from the projects that they have contracted out until it gets to your paycheck. Like the way that the CRM thing works is it's providing professional opinion on being in compliance with environmental law at the state, local, and federal level. So the companies and government agencies hire the cultural resource management company to give them that expert advice based on their experience and knowledge of, historic properties, archaeology, but also historic preservation law. There's kind of two ways that companies get contracts. They either market them through their own connections. So they kind of conjure them up from their own network of knowing developers. And, this doesn't really work with government agencies who have to have transparency in government spending, but definitely mining companies, developers, private companies CRM people who are the principal investigators or owners or whatever will build professional relationships to the point where they just are the sole service provider of those expert opinions. So I used to work for a company in Tucson that really worked with a lot of the mines in Arizona. The mining companies did not look for proposals for how much it would cost to be in compliance with state and federal law. They just called their consultant, which was the company I worked for, and asked them how much money it was going to cost. And they came up with a cost, and then the mining company decided whether they're going to pay it or not pay it, right? They could negotiate back and forth, but because they always gave them good opinions and good advice. They never, they didn't waste any time looking for another company. They just stuck with my company. So getting those kind of just sole service contracts, that's one way. But then there's the competitive bidding process that has to happen for the government agencies and a lot of other companies. They want to try to get the best price / the cheapest price. They'll say that it's like the best fit or most cost effective. They mean cheapest for actual competent work. That's what they're actually meaning to say. And so the company will try to decide how much expertise they're going to give for X amount of dollars. Either which way, you enter into the contract with the client, and they agree to pay you for the services, and they could give you a little bit up front, but usually it comes at the end of that payment. But then they have a bunch of other obligations and stuff that they have from their business, and there could be a gap of months and months before their money comes from their company or government agency, gets into the company's bank account, and then they pay you out. If the company doesn't constantly having contracts rolling through all the time, then there could be that gap, which ends up with you ending up in layoff or what is it where you have a few less days? I don't know. They told us that we had it. I'm trying to think of it. I can't think of it right now. Furlough, that's right, furlough. So you could be, partial furlough, completely full furloughed, laid off, whatever, right? So surviving in cultural resources like this COVID thing is, it could be potentially one of the biggest boons to cultural resources that ever happened. If they all get their stuff together and just decide to turn on the machines and print off more money and spend it all on environmental compliance, then there won't be any problem. It'll only be a lull in the experience that you could have gotten by going into the field. But on the other side of this, there's going to be a huge boom in infrastructure spending, which means archaeologists, and we're going to find a lot of sites, and it's going to be a really exciting time. If they decide not to do that, then it could be the famine period where you take a job at Best Buy to survive while you keep applying for jobs in archaeology and just keeping the dream alive somehow, right? So either which way, I just want folks to know that if you do archaeology, and universities are not immune to this, man. Furlough is a thing that happens at universities. They can fire tenure track faculty if they don't have the money to pay us. So it's not like there is a such thing as like a safe job any which way, anywhere. Like the only way you can provide for that is to make sure you save, you have your money in a good place, you don't have too much debt, and then you don't take on too much liabilities in case there comes a time when you have less money coming in. And then you have some other kind of alternate way, like either some other skill you can work in another place, or you have a side hustle or something else. Like that's just kind of being an American, really. Like that's the way it's always been to be a human being. But going back to the question about gaining experience during COVID and the shutdowns. So shutdowns are inevitable, and you could end up spending that time watching Netflix, or you can do something like learn a transferable skill that's useful in archaeology. So the thing that I'll always tell students in the United States is learn historic preservation law, especially in a state like California that has CEQA, which is not exactly the same as the National Historic Preservation Act or the National Environmental Policy Act. And those two things are free. The law is published on the internet. There are tons and tons of blog posts discussing it. Tom King, he's written books. Some of them are more expensive than we can afford. Go get his older versions. The law has not changed that much in the last 50 years that you won't be able to make heads or tails of it. Check out the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation website and the other places where they keep all those laws, and they post the updates, what they've changed and what they've amended and updated, right? So reading those things so that you actually, in fact, know why there is a cultural resources industry, because that expert opinion is coming from understanding of how to navigate those complicated laws. That's like the bottom level that anyone can do. You don't have to have a college degree. You don't have to be an archaeologist. Like, you have a million, ways to figure it out. Your phone, all the stuff, like you can save the PDFs, read through those laws for sure. See if you can find an online group, some kind of Facebook or LinkedIn group where you can talk about the laws and ask questions. A lot of times people from the Advisory Council or the State Historic Preservation Office will be on these architectural history forums, and you can ask questions and get responses, because all of those things you're figuring out. While it's not actually digging holes or monitoring or artifact analysis, you are learning about the reason why cultural resources exists. And when you write an application or a cover letter for a job, and you can very clearly say that, they're going to think that you have tons of experience, that you've been around for years and years, because most archaeologists spend all their time learning about artifacts and sites and features and all that other stuff, and they don't learn anything about the law until they're like a management level, when they've been doing it like 15 years and they're finally in charge. That's when they learn why they even had a job for more than a decade. So just short circuit that. Go ahead and use that as your way to get to learn something about cultural resources. Because in all fairness, 90% of the archaeologists that work in the United States, they work either for the government or a cultural resources company. There's very few tenure track faculty in the United States. So like, that's the reason why all that exists. That's the reason why the federal agencies have to have historic preservation people on their departments. When you apply for the Forest Service or whatever, having that knowledge, it'll be very clear for you to explain why you should have a job or why that job exists. Companies want people who know that stuff too. So then the other thing to gain experience would be like, I always recommend that people also learn a deep amount of information about at least one thing, to the point where it's like, if you even open your mouth one time about brass keys, somebody's going to, sock you in the mouth, like to the point where everything about glass blown bottles that could possibly be known, or whatever kind of projectile point, or whatever kind of obsidian hydration or something else. Like, one thing that you wanted to know about archaeology, start reading all the stuff you can while you're a student, that you can download all this stuff for free. So what I'm saying is, you're not going to actually be able to get field experience, or I'll take that back. If they do all these infrastructure things that they've proposed, there will be chances for you to get hired, and you will be able to differentiate yourself from others if you spent that time learning about one thing and the laws. Like, everybody needs to know the laws, but if you have one specialty that you've really read a lot about, then that can set you apart as a paleobotanist or a geomorphologist or something like that. Eventually you could go on and get a degree, but you could also just know a lot anyway, right? There's nothing that prevents you from knowing a lot. It is difficult for you to get actual fieldwork experience if we cancel all the field schools and people only hire folks who have already gone through all the COVID safety protocols, right? So like, every company has these safety protocols. It's in their incentive to hire people who have already gone through those protocols. It's expensive to train folks. And so there's less incentive to hire people who haven't actually gone through it. But I would just say, take this time, if you cannot find an opportunity for field work, to expand on your intellectual work, especially aiming for free stuff, man. Like, being a university student, you can download a lot of PDFs from the library. And like I said, if you find something like Southwestern ceramics, or, enslaved African produced ceramics or something like that, and you just keep reading and reading and reading about it, right now you have access to unlimited amount of PDFs through your library. Download them all and start saving them. You'll have access to them on your phone, your tablet, and your laptop, which means that even if you don't remember the exact quote, it's never more than a few clicks away from you. So, I did that doing historical artifact analysis, tried to read everything I could on glass bottles and stuff like that for years when I was a master's student. And I have all those many articles saved about all these different bottle identifications. And that thing is really useful when you're at an archaeological site, being able to very quickly date certain layers and connect certain things to certain cities, just because you know the logos for hundreds and hundreds of bottles. Learning every production code for the hobble skirt Coca-Cola bottles wasn't the most riveting thing when I first met my wife, but that definitely, it's not going to get you more friends, but it could keep you employed.
Those are both really, really, really good points. Thank you for sharing that. And I do tell my especially my graduate students, but my undergrads all the time, like you need a skill, like you just need one skill. Like if it's, you know, prehistoric, like ceramics, you know, like whatever Siebel whitewares, then great, do it. You know, lithics analysis, something like that can be incredibly helpful. And we do spend 3 or 4 weeks talking just about section 106 in my methods class, and you have to. And I completely agree that just knowing that basic ins and outs of historic preservation law in this country is absolutely necessary. And it's something that I wish personally I had learned, you know, when I was 21, just going into this field. So yeah, and Tom King has a lot of online resources as well that are very accessible. So so it's 11:20 and I actually have to run off to another meeting at 11:30. So let's start to tie up if that's okay.
Okay.
If there are any last sort of burning questions or any last notes that you want to make, Dr. White, here's your chance.
So I'll just tell folks that this is an exciting time to be going after archaeology, because we have, I mean, it's built on top of 50 years of finding thousands and thousands of sites. So we know more about North American prehistory and history than ever before. And we're crossing into this new phase where now it's getting to be less and less defendable, or it's harder and harder for archaeologists to defend not working with communities. Native American tribes have really forged the path in forcing archaeologists to give sovereignty of heritage sites and you know, knowledge basically to the people who created those things. It's expanding to African American, you know, folks, more and more discussions about sovereignty. So in the next 50 years, we're going to see an entire change of what we knew and the way we've interpreted the past. And so right now, being here, you all get to be here at the very beginning of like a new major era in North American archaeology, because now it's not just archaeologists digging for contracts, you know, willy-nilly. There's more push for state agencies that are, you know, behind, you know, enforcing these compliance, to mandate collaboration with groups and to put input of other people. So the archaeology you're going to see 50 years from now is going to look completely different. It's going to be loaded with a whole bunch of high-tech analysis and, you know, data management stuff with a lot of different ways to disseminate knowledge that's integrated a lot of stuff from local communities. And so you're going to see other people who aren't really archaeologists, that are just elders, that are, you know, experts in those cultures, that are really coloring the interpretations, working with archaeologists. And I think 50 years from now, it's going to be really hard to just do a report that says, you know, wow, there was a prehistoric village here, it was dated from this time to that, and we learned a whole lot, and we have this many thousands of artifacts. It's going to be totally different. There's going to be recorded conversations, videos, the PDF's going to have embedded 3D models of all these different artifacts and all this stuff. And it's all going to be coming from amazing folks who learned all this stuff, like you all. Like you all are going to learn all this stuff, and you're going to make it this totally different field that no one ever even imagined could exist. So this is a great time for everybody to be going into archaeology, I think.
I agree. Thank you, Bill. Okay, so if there's no last burning questions, I think that we'll probably end about here, but Dr. White kindly shared a list of resources with me in advance of our meeting for today, so I'll be sure to send those out to all of you in my courses. And if some of you are not in my course, I'm more than happy to share those on the anthropology listserv as well. So we will share that in all of our social media pages online. I'll email that to you. And so hopefully you will be able to spend some time looking through them. Also, check out Dr. White's, all of his many podcasts as well. You can easily find that information just with a basic Google search. Do you mind if I send students your way if they have any further questions for you specifically?
Nope, that's totally fine.
Okay, great. So I will share his information with you all as well. So
okay.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Bill. This
All right.
is really fantastic.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Yeah, thank you for your time, and your expertise is great.
Take care of each other.
Yes, take care. You too.
Bye.
Thank you.